Okay, picture this. What if a whole community of citizens, I mean, people living scattered across continents, oceans away from their home country, what if they suddenly decided, right, let's use our vote collectively to, really pressure the leadership back home?
Well, that's pretty much exactly what seems to have happened in Serbia's 2024 parliamentary election.
Right.
For years, decades even, the Serbian diaspora,
Hmm.
folks living everywhere from Vienna and Berlin to Toronto and Chicago, they were politically aware, sure.
Yeah, engaged, but maybe not decisive.
Exactly. Their influence was often seen as, well, peripheral.
Yeah.
But this year, that whole narrative just fundamentally shifted.
So we're diving into a political force that it feels like almost overnight really started reshaping Serbia's political landscape. And Serbia's always been caught in that tricky spot, hasn't it?
hmm That tug of war between wanting closer ties with Europe, with the EU, and also maintaining strong connections with traditional allies further east.
And our mission today, for you listening, is really to unpack how this happened. How did this divided diaspora suddenly become such a decisive one?
Yeah, why did so many more people suddenly decide to register and vote? What was driving them? And crucially, how did what looks like a small percentage of votes overall?
Like, statistically small.
Right. How did that small fraction cast abroad manage to have such an enormous impact on the national conversation back in Serbia?
Okay, before we get into the actual numbers, maybe let's just quickly set the scene. Politically, I mean.
Good idea. So you need to remember, Serbia's been under the pretty firm grip of the ruling party, led by President Alexander Vučić, since way back in 2012.
A long time.
A very long time. And those years have seen, persistent allegations of high-level corruption, significant concerns about media freedom and control, and also frequent, sometimes quite large, civil protests.
It's a charged atmosphere, then. Lots of talk about patronage networks and opposition that really struggles to get its message out.
Definitely. It's a deeply entrenched system. And into this system lands the diaspora vote. It acted almost like a external truth serum, if you will.
How so?
Well, these are voters living outside the direct day-to-day influence of state-controlled media or maybe local political pressures. They represented a completely different kind of electorate with different perspectives.
Okay, let's talk scale then, because this isn't a small group we're discussing.
Not at all. The estimates vary a bit, but we're looking at somewhere between 600,000, maybe 700,000 Serbian citizens living outside the country.
Wow, where are they mostly?
Heavily concentrated in the EU, like Germany, Austria, Switzerland, but also significant numbers in North America, Canada, the US, and Australia too.
And the key thing is, most didn't leave because of direct political persecution, right? It was more economic.
Primarily, yes.
Yeah.
People left seeking better job opportunities, a higher quality of life, maybe a more predictable future for their kids. But, and this is crucial, they still care deeply about what happens back home.
And that desire, that caring, translated into action this year.
Massive action. That's the real story. We saw the total number of diaspora votes jump by over 30% compared to the last election. Over 30%.
And 30%, that's huge. You saw the pictures, right? The
Yeah.
queues outside embassies and consulates, Vienna, Frankfurt, Zurich, people waiting for hours.
Exactly. That 30% increase isn't just a statistic. It represents thousands of people making a real effort, often traveling long distances, taking time off work.
It signals real motivation, more than just ticking a box for civic duty, it feels like. Almost a statement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you dig into who these voters are, a profile emerges. They tend to be, on average, younger than the population back home, often more highly educated.
And living in Western countries.
Precisely. They're immersed daily in Western democratic systems, whether it's Germany or Canada or wherever.
Yeah.
And so naturally, they tend to place a really high value on things like, strong independent institutions, accountability from politicians, transparency.
Things they see as maybe lacking back in Serbia.
That's the implication. And they generally favor closer integration with the European Union. These values often clash pretty directly with the ruling party's approach, which has often leaned more nationalist, more centralized.
So their lived experience abroad sharpens their focus on issues like media control or corruption back home. It makes those things feel more, unacceptable.
I think that's fair to say. Their values are shaped by their current environment, and that clashes with the governance style they see or remember in Serbia. They're voting, in a sense, for the kind of country they believe Serbia could be, based on the standards they now live by.
Okay, so we have the numbers, the 30% jump, the profile of the voter. But how do we connect that to the individual? What makes someone actually go through the hassle? We have some stories from the sources, right?
Yeah, and they're quite powerful. It often boils down to this feeling of fighting for a future they felt they couldn't personally achieve back home.
Like Milalo, the software engineer.
Exactly. Milush, living in Berlin, left Serbia in 2018. He said, quite plainly, that he couldn't find fair job opportunities in Belgrade that weren't somehow tied to political connections or, navigating low-level corruption.
So for him, voting is...
He described it as his small way to fight for change. Change that might mean others like him wouldn't have to leave in the future.
And it wasn't just professionals feeling this way. There was Ivana, the nurse in Toronto.
Right. Her motivation was different, but just as compelling. She said she votes primarily for her parents, who are still living in Belgrade.
Thinking about their future.
Yes. Thinking about things like healthcare services, pensions, even environmental issues like the chronic air pollution in Belgrade that directly impacts her family's health. Her vote is for them.
These stories really hit home. It shows that voting from abroad isn't just abstract politics. It's deeply personal. It's an act of identity, isn't it? A way of saying, hey, I might live elsewhere, but I still belong. I still have a stake here.
That's perfectly put. I still belong. And that powerful emotional undercurrent, that sense of continued connection and responsibility, created the ideal conditions for organized mobilization.
Okay, so that feeling is the fuel. But how did they actually harness it? How did diaspora groups turn that emotion into registered voters, especially when dealing with, let's be honest, often complicated embassy registration processes?
Yeah, the bureaucracy can be a real hurdle. The key seems to have been coordination and simplification. Diaspora organizations realized the main barrier wasn't necessarily apathy, it was the sheer hassle factor.
So they focused on logistics.
Exactly. They launched very targeted online campaigns, not just saying go vote, but explaining how to vote. They took complex official forms and instructions and broke them down into simple step-by-step guides. Lots of visuals, videos.
Making it easy to understand. I remember reading about social media playing a big role.
Huge role.
Yeah.
There was one group mentioned, Serbs Abroad for Democracy. Apparently, it just exploded in followers almost overnight. And they weren't just sharing political opinions. They were providing really practical, actionable info. Which consulate covers your area? What documents do you need? What are the exact deadlines? It was like grassroots political organizing, but focused entirely on the logistics of getting the vote out.
Turning intention into actual cast ballots.
Precisely.
Okay, let's shift from getting people registered to the actual impact of those votes. We know the sentiment was largely anti-government among the diaspora. What did the final results from abroad actually look like?
They were pretty stark, crushing, really, for the ruling party. If you look at Germany, for example, over 65% of Serbian voters there backed the main opposition coalition.
65%?
Yeah. In Austria, it was even more pronounced. The opposition vote beat the government support by more than 20 percentage points.
20 points?
And then you look across the Atlantic, North America, nearly 80% of the votes cast went to anti-government candidates or coalitions. It shows a very, very clear, consistent preference among Serbs living abroad.
Okay, those are incredibly lopsided numbers. But, and this is the critical point, I guess we have to square that with the overall national picture. You said earlier the diaspora vote was only about, 2% of the total votes cast?
That's right, around 2% nationally. So on the surface, you might think, well, how much difference can that really make?
Exactly. How does 2% make such a big splash?
This is where Serbia's specific electoral system comes into play. It's a form of proportional representation, but the allocation of seats in the 250-seat parliament can be really sensitive, especially in tight elections.
Ah, so it's about marginal seats.
It often comes down to very narrow results in certain constituencies, particularly in the bigger betties where the opposition tends to be stronger anyway. That 2%, distributed strategically, even unintentionally, can act as a critical swing factor in those specific races.
So it's not that the diaspora single-handedly flipped the entire national result.
No, not nationally.
But it likely tipped the balance in several key local contests, potentially costing the ruling party seats they might have expected to win?
That's the analysis, yes. And perhaps, just as importantly, maybe even more so, that 2% provided something else. Undeniable, measurable proof.
Proof of what?
Proof for international observers, for domestic media, that the opposition's narrative about widespread disillusionment wasn't just talk. Here was hard data showing that when Serbians could vote outside the domestic pressures and media environment, they voted overwhelmingly against the government.
So it gave the opposition a kind of legitimacy boost, a stronger narrative.
Absolutely. It showed their claims had substance. It demonstrated that hundreds of thousands of Serbians, given a free choice, opted for change. That's powerful ammunition in the political debate.
But this whole situation sparked a huge controversy, didn't it? A really polarizing debate about whether the diaspora should even have this kind of influence.
Oh, definitely. That debate raged before and after the election. The critics, mainly supporters of the government, made a pretty straightforward argument that people who don't live in Serbia, who don't deal with the day-to-day realities, the economy, the infrastructure, the local problems, shouldn't have such a potentially decisive say in who governs the country.
The no taxation without representation argument, but in reverse, like no representation if you don't face the consequences.
Sort of. The rhetoric often accused the opposition of, quote, weaponizing the diaspora to undermine national sovereignty. The argument was, these voters are insulated from the cost of living crisis, from inflation, from the effects of policy decisions. Why should their vote carry the same weight?
It's a practical argument. You can see the logic. But the opposition had a counter-argument, right?
A very strong one. They framed these votes as representing the free voice of Serbia. They argued these are precisely the citizens who felt compelled to leave in the first place because of the very issues, the corruption, lack of opportunity that they are now voting against.
So their vote is a consequence of the government's actions.
That's the counter-narrative. Their leaving is the consequence, and their vote is a direct reflection of that experience. It creates this really complex democratic dilemma, doesn't it?
Yeah. Is the vote of Milo, the engineer who felt he had to leave to find fair work, somehow less valid than the vote of someone who stayed?
The diaspora argues they're voting for the kind of structural reforms, rule of law, anti-corruption measures that would actually make Serbia a more viable place to live for everyone in the long run. They see it as being about the fundamental health of the country, even if it causes short-term political waves.
And speaking of crossing boundaries, we have to talk about the digital side of this. The mobilization wasn't just phone calls and leaflets.
Not at all. Social media was absolutely central, a real digital battlefield. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, they were key, especially for reaching younger diaspora Serbs.
How were they used effectively? It wasn't just political memes, I assume.
No, it was very practical again. People shared these simple, engaging videos like TikToks or Instagram Reels, showing exactly how to navigate the registration process online or through embassies. Step-by-step guides made shareable, even kind of trendy.
Turning bureaucracy into content. Clever.
Yeah, very clever. It lowered the barrier to entry, made it feel less daunting.
And then there was that detail about the logistics, which just blew my mind. It went way beyond online clicks, didn't it?
Yeah, this really shows the level of commitment. People actually crowd-funded bus trips.
Seriously, bus trips.
Yes, organizing buses to take groups of voters across borders, sometimes traveling for hours from smaller towns in, say, Italy or Switzerland, to get to the nearest official polling station in a major consulate city like Munich or Vienna, just to cast one ballot.
That's incredible dedication. People paying money and spending a whole day traveling.
It points to a highly organized, incredibly passionate grassroots effort. This wasn't just spontaneous anger. It was strategic deployment of resources, time, money, social networks. The hashtags they used, like hashtag #VoteForChange and hashtag #SerbiaBroadVotes, they became symbols of this whole transnational movement.
So what was the immediate outcome? The election happened, the votes were counted?
Well, as largely expected, the ruling party did hold on to power nationally. And it's significant, but their majority was noticeably narrower than in previous elections.
So the diaspora vote, while not changing the ultimate winner, maybe shaved off some of that dominance.
It certainly contributed to that tighter margin, and opposition leaders immediately pointed to the diaspora contribution. They credited those voters with energizing their base both abroad and, importantly, back home. It proved dissatisfaction was real and measurable.
And what happens next? Did this election change the conversation about diaspora voting moving forward?
Massively. The debate immediately pivoted to the future. There's now a very serious, very high-stakes discussion happening about potentially expanding diaspora voting rights.
How so? Like making it easier?
The big one is allowing online or digital voting. Right now, having to physically go to a consulate is a huge barrier that limits participation. If you live hours away, it's just not feasible for many.
And if they allowed online voting?
The analysts are pretty clear. They predict that making voting truly accessible, like through a secure online system, could easily double diaspora participation, maybe even more.
Double it. Given the impact that 2% had this time, doubling it to 4% or more, that could absolutely be enough to swing a national election outcome in the future.
Exactly. That's the potential game changer down the road. The diaspora could become the ultimate kingmaker.
Which puts the government in a really tough spot, doesn't it?
A very tough spot.
Yeah.
If they make voting easier, they risk potentially losing power altogether, given how strongly the diaspora leans towards the opposition. But if they try to maintain or even tighten the restrictions, they risk looking undemocratic and losing legitimacy, both domestically and internationally. It's a real dilemma.
So zooming out for a final thought here, Serbia's experience, while unique in its details, isn't happening in a vacuum, is it? This whole idea of diasporas influencing home country politics.
No, it's a growing global trend. We see similar dynamics playing out all over the world. Think about elections in Turkey, Mexico, the Philippines, Nigeria. Diasporas are increasingly organized and active.
They're not just sending money home anymore.
Right. They're sending votes, they're bringing in global perspectives, they're pushing for accountability, for reforms based on their experiences elsewhere. Migration is reshaping democracy itself.
Which brings us back to that fundamental provocative question that Serbia's election really highlighted, doesn't it?
It does. Who ultimately gets to decide a nation's future? Is it only those who physically reside there and live with the immediate daily consequences of government decisions?
Or do those who left perhaps because of those decisions, but still hold a deep connection, a vested interest in the country's long-term health and structure, also get a say?
That tension, that's the core dilemma. The idealism projected from afar versus the pragmatism, maybe the constraints, of life on the ground. And with migration only set to increase, this question is going to become even more critical for democracies everywhere.
It really shows that political belonging is becoming more complex.
Absolutely. The story of the 2024 Serbian diaspora vote is a powerful case study. From those long queues at embassies to the viral hashtags mobilizing voters online.
It sends a clear message.
A very clear message. No matter where you live, your voice, if organized and determined, can still echo powerfully back home. It underscores that democracy, ideally, belongs to everyone with a stake in the nation's future, regardless of their current address.